I am the founder of a platform called Freelancer Club. And Freelancer Club is all about supporting and nurturing freelance talent on one side and ensuring that they get the necessary training, the supports, and access to opportunities. And then on the other sides, we have the hiring clients. And something that we're very passionate about is providing an alternative way for companies to engage with freelancers. And we want to present some of those alternatives to them to try and beat what we believe to be a number of challenges out there for both parties, to make it a much more seamless and passionate way to do business together. So let me see if I can move through my presentation. Sorry, Anna, my presentation seems to have deserted me here. Let me see, can I do it manually? So when I was a photographer many years ago, I fell into freelancing almost accidentally. It was a consequence of not fully knowing what to do after university and friends of mine discovering that I owned a camera. And that seemed to be the only necessity for them to ask me to take photos of a wedding. And that set me on a trajectory of taking photos, building up a freelance business, and making a lot of mistakes along the way. I really had no fundamental business understanding. And so that was the trial and error process of becoming a freelancer. I think something that's pretty common, certainly for a lot of freelancers in the creative space. It then transpired that I landed a great client after a year or so, who gave me a lot of work. 2-3 days a week I was shooting for them. It was a fashion retail company, quite similar to somebody like ASOS, but well before the online e-retail boom. And in addition to the work they gave me, they started to flesh out my role a little bit. So they wanted to give me more responsibility, have me bring teams together and organize their entire content department. So I dropped all my other clients. I did work with this company for a few days a week, and then I got to work on my own personal projects in my spare time. The relationship for the first year was fantastic. Second year, I didn't get an invoice paid. The second month after chasing, it still wasn't paid, and the excuses started to roll in. Everything from the accountancy software was updating to a change in how they pay invoices and freelancers. And then month 3 and 4, I started borrowing money from friends and family. I was really in a lot of debt. And it hit a point where I couldn't keep going. And so I went into their head office and discovered it was completely empty. They had gone bankrupt. They were using me and other freelancers to shoot the content, to sell the last of the stock. And I was left with an £11,000 invoice. This is the very flattering photo of me a number of years ago, where the photographer for the story that made the press about this issue, for some reason asked me to smile. I never fully understood that. So off the back of this story and article, I received a flood of messages from other freelancers who were empathizing with my situation and telling me that similar things had happened to them. So this was very much the seed that was planted to start my journey on the murky world of unpaid work and exploitative behavior within the freelance space. A few years later, when we set up Freelancer Club, we did so with a promise that we would not post unpaid work on the platform. It was really as simple as that. And we wanted to raise awareness around that concept. And so we launched a campaign called No Free Work. It started as a hashtag on Twitter, and it very quickly snowballed into something that was far greater than we could have ever imagined. We realized that this problem was rife, and it was running through a number of different sectors in the freelance industries. So we decided to try and understand it from a data perspective. we built out a survey with multiple questions tackling all the nuances of unpaid work. And where we started was with a definition. Now, this seems like a very obvious and simple concept, that unpaid work is unpaid work. It's something that you're asked to do and there's no payment. But when you really try and distill the definition, it becomes a lot more complex. So the definition we landed on was work that does not receive any direct remuneration, such as monetary payment, services, or goods. However, we then had to make a distinction between voluntary work, charity work, collaborative work, shadowing, even the likes of interning. It became incredibly nuanced and clear to us that there were all of these differential components to unpaid work that a lot of companies, from an exploitative perspective, were using as a way to get professionals to produce work for them and not pay. In other instances, it was purely naivety. There was no exploitative motivations whatsoever, but it was a case of the companies really not knowing what the rules were. On top of that, we discovered that there was a cultural issue. Again, because we came from this creative space where unpaid work is most prevalent, this concept of individuals providing creative work was sometimes seen as a hobby or something that, because they loved doing it, they would do it for free. And this is not something that has stopped or is born of history into the dark ages. This is still happening up until very recently. I read an article with a very, very large supermarket chain here in the UK who had asked an artist to paint a mural on the side of their building, and all for the glory of putting their art onto a canvas on some motorway in the middle of England. So we put this report out to try and see if our assumptions were true. And we started by asking a number of questions, but with an overriding mission. Was unpaid work beneficial to your career? So we surveyed over 1,000 freelancers, all of whom had accepted unpaid work at some stage, and we dug into that data. So on the left-hand graphic, this is a breakdown of why freelancers are accepting unpaid work. Exposure and experience, I think, are quite self-evident. Prestige probably needs a little bit of unpacking. Typically, prestige would refer to a freelancer accepting unpaid work for a company that they admired or perhaps wanted to put onto their CV, a company that was aspirational, that they've always looked up to and felt that they would love to do the work for this company. Under the other 18% option, the most prominent answer was the promise of paid work in the future. So if you do this for free and you do a good job, we might give you some paid work as a consequence. On the right-hand side, we take a look at the impact that unpaid work had on their career. And this was really the crux of what we wanted to get to. 51%, over half, said that they had a negative experience. And 22% said that they had no benefit from the experience of unpaid work. Now, it could be argued that no benefit from unpaid work is a negative. So this is an overwhelmingly negative experience from over 1,000 freelancers who had accepted unpaid work. The 27% who had a positive experience often referenced things that you would expect. They got more work after, they built up their confidence, they built experience. So you can see the argument from a freelancer side as to why they might engage in this practice. The other highlights that came out that I think are worth noting, and bear in mind there are 200 reams of information and data lines, but I'm just picking out some of the more interesting pieces of information. 7 years was the average experience of a freelancer who accepted unpaid work. Now, we really thought this was just a problem for newer freelancers entering the market who needed to build up experience, add to their portfolio, etc. But no, people were accepting unpaid work well into their career. 7 years is just the average. And what we also discovered was that if you accepted unpaid work early, you were more inclined to accept it throughout your career, to the point where you would build up a reputation that you are the type of person who will do work for free. And the other big figure to note is £5,394 sterling. That is the figure that it costs each freelancer each year because of unpaid work. And we were able to extract that figure based on the data that we had and the amount of money that they were leaving on the table based on the value of jobs that they were doing for nothing. That's quite a sobering figure. Now, in addition to the hard data, we wanted to get some anecdotal impact reasons and asking our surveyed freelancers how it impacted their lives. And I have to tell you that reading some of these answers was difficult, to say the least. On the top end of the scale, if we look over to the right and in a positive column, they got to learn and practice new skills. That came back a lot. We started to realize those motivations behind accepting unpaid work and where they came from. And then as we started to get into the more damaging and darker areas, we started to see some real problems. There's a huge issue around freelancers feeling unworthy. They don't fully understand their value. When unpaid work snowballs and they start to realize that they're desperate and they need to accept unpaid work in the hope that paid work comes around the corner, it has a huge impact on their mental health. You can see a big breakdown in confidence. And then there's the financial ramifications of being unable to pay their bills. And in some cases, as you can see from the left-hand side graphic, skipping meals and having no choice but to accept an offer for free lunch with no pay. So we really have a situation where it's creating huge financial anxieties and pressures for certain freelancers when there's a culture of unpaid work in their sector. Now, as we dug deeper into these issues and as we spoke to more and more of the freelancers about the consequences of unpaid work, we started to see that it was deeply affecting underprivileged sectors as well as minority groups. Diversity and inclusion, in addition to fair payment, started to become a very prevalent component of what we were seeing back from the data. So we went back to our reporting and we put out another survey called Ethical Hiring, where we wanted to discover some of the ways in which freelancers are interacting with their clients and with companies and what they really think of the process. How does a freelancer behave? How do they feel when engaging in a project? So we broke it down into payment, diversity, and inclusion. On the left-hand side, we had a look at low paid work as well as late payments. The data around this showed that low paid work often led to freelancers feeling like the relationship was completely transactional between themselves and the client, which in a lot of instances is not a problem. It's an individual there to solve an issue for a company and they are completing a task. But in other instances, it completely demotivated them, particularly in projects that were ongoing or where the freelancer had a continuous relationship with the client. They started to drop their levels of work and became disengaged and detached from the process of the project. The other reason that came back to us quite frequently was the freelancer just wasn't in any way invested into the company's mission or into the company's values. And that again bled into the inclusion piece, when they felt very much like they were brought in to do a job and not integrated into the company in any way, shape, or form. In some cases, they wouldn't be introduced to other members of the team. You can imagine what that's like now in a blended workforce in a remote capacity, how isolating that feels. If we move on to the anecdotal evidence that came back, we can then start to see some of the discriminatory behaviors that went on as well when we asked freelancers about their experiences in regards to gender, ethnicity, religion, disability. And we started to see that the same problems that exist in a day-to-day employees' lifestyle exist for freelancers. But in this instance, freelancers don't have anywhere to turn. So what we're gathering from all of this evidence and all of this data is that we've got a problem when it comes to how freelancers and companies are engaging. Often, and some on this call may resonate to this, companies will delegate the hiring of a freelancer to a junior or even a head of a department. And so they're immediately starting a precedent that is incredibly informal and unstructured. And that precedent goes on through the entire process of the freelance experience when they do the work and they complete the project. There's no formality, there's very little onboarding. The way in which freelancers are managed is up in the air and typically looked upon as a taskification process. And all of this has two major outcomes. One, it's not a great experience for the freelancer. Okay, that's it may not be of great concern to companies. But two, the results and outcomes that they're producing drop off and subsequently impact the company's bottom line. So it is incredibly clear that improving the internal hiring processes and looking at a framework similar to ethical hiring will greatly improve the experience for both parties and the results of the project. So in addition to raising awareness around unpaid work and subsequently ethical hiring, something that we're putting a huge amount of focus and investment in, we wanted to integrate tech into our platform to see could we try and prompt some of the solutions and jumpstart these conversations with other companies. One such integrated tech is a feature called unbiased filter mode. So what we're looking at here is a directory of freelancers on the Freelancer Club. And by clicking the unbiased filter, it removes the profile image and name of each of the freelancers so that the hiring company is making decisions purely on the basis of the individual's work and not the color of their skin. The other feature that has been a great success is our budget projector. So when a client posts a job, with the data they've given us, we're able to project a industry standards payment rate based on the level of the type of freelancer they're looking for. And the other aspect that we introduced is a consultancy piece where we will sit down and chat with companies who are interested in implementing some form of ethical hiring. They'll often want to integrate that process into their culture and try and create a streamlined way to form a blended workforce model or even engage exclusively in freelancers to build their business, but in a way that is much more inclusive and builds a culture that respects the both sides of the agreement. So in addition to talking about this, we've managed to raise a lot of awareness through press, media, podcasts, presentations like these, and we're in addition speaking to the UK government about changing the legislation to give freelancers more legal rights. In New York, they passed a bill called Freelancing Isn't Free. And this bill is quite interesting. This makes contracts mandatory over a certain amount, over a certain value rather of a project. They have something called double damages. So when an unpaid invoice goes to court and the company is found wanting, they have to pay twice the amount of the project. Again, a means to try and discourage poor practices in this space. And what we'd like to do is push something similar through in the UK. And I recognize that there are pros and cons looking at how we shift our culture and implement changes into our businesses when it comes to integrating freelancers, but we are at a perfect storm. What we predicted would happen a number of years ago in terms of how freelancers would integrate into companies has been expedited dramatically due to the pandemic and the lockdown. Companies are far more confident engaging in freelancers and remote work. And subsequently, we're seeing bigger and bigger companies change their structure to integrate a blended workforce model. That and the technology that allows us to facilitate these connections with the conversation around the future of work top of mind, I believe now is the perfect time for us to start setting a new precedent that'll enable a better working environment for both parties and a better human first relationship that can result in far superior results, greater mental health, a fairer society, an inclusive society, and one where it's far more harmonious in the way we work together. Now, we are hugely passionate about spreading this word, and we are more than happy to share our data, our reports, and our insights with any other company that's interested in integrating similar principles into their company. So if you have a company or have a client that is interested in changing the way they integrate their internal hiring processes, we would gladly, at no cost, give up that information and sit down and have a conversation about ways in which that can be implemented so that we can have a fair system moving forward.